I still remember the way the suitcase felt in my hand, cold metal handle pressing against my palm, the zipper catching on the corner as if even my luggage knew I wasn't wanted where I was going. Or rather, where I wasn't going. "You don't need to come," my wife Melissa had said that morning, her voice cutting through the kitchen like the blade of a knife. She didn't even look up from her coffee. "It'll just be easier for everyone if you stay home this time." The family reunion, the one I had organized for years, the one where I used to roast the barbecue, set up the lawn chairs, and tell the same old stories that made the nieces and nephews laugh. Now, apparently, I was an inconvenience. "What do you mean, stay home?" I asked. The words sharp, desperate. I looked around the kitchen at the morning light streaming through the blinds, striping the granite countertop I'd worked overtime to afford. The smell of coffee, the faint trace of toast. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like a courtroom, and Melissa was the judge. Her eyes flicked up, cold and steady. "It's just, you talk too much. You make people uncomfortable sometimes. My sister said it last year. And honestly," she paused, sipping her coffee like she was delivering a casual opinion about the weather, "it would be better if you stayed behind." My chest tightened. I felt the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, every little sound suddenly amplified in the silence that followed. Better if I stayed behind. Like I was some kind of liability. I thought of all the years I'd driven across states for her family, the Christmas gifts I'd wrapped with my own clumsy fingers, the repairs I'd made to her brother's broken-down truck, the nights I'd loaned money I didn't really have, just so they wouldn't lose their house. And now I was baggage. "Melissa," I said, my voice low, almost pleading, "I'm your husband. Your family is supposed to be mine too." But she shook her head, already standing, already dismissing me like a teacher excusing a student. "Not this year. Stay home. Relax. They won't even notice." She left the coffee cup in the sink, my sink, in the kitchen I had remodeled with my own two hands, and walked out the door with her suitcase rolling smoothly behind her. Like everything in her life glided while I stumbled. The screen door slammed, and I was left in silence. What she didn't know was that she had just drawn the line in the sand. Because I wasn't going to stay home. I was going somewhere better. I sat alone in the kitchen long after Melissa left, the ticking clock filling the silence like a taunt. The morning light had shifted, stretching across the table where we once shared breakfasts full of laughter and plans. Now the chair across from me was empty, its cushion slightly indented from where she'd sat, just minutes before delivering the verdict that I wasn't welcome. I reached for the framed photo on the counter last year's reunion. Everyone smiling, arms linked, the kids with their faces painted like superheroes. I was there too, at the far end, half cropped out because Melissa's cousin insisted on taking the photo. I remembered the sweat on my back from grilling under the July sun, the ache in my legs from hauling chairs, coolers, and tables, and still I had smiled. Because that's what you do for family. But maybe, I thought bitterly, family didn't mean the same thing to Melissa as it did to me. Her family had always looked at me differently. Not bad, just like I didn't quite belong. The outsider. The man who worked too many hours, whose jokes weren't refined enough, whose hands were rough from years of labor. Melissa used to laugh it off when I mentioned it. "You overthink things," she'd say, brushing my concerns away with a smile. But smiles fade, and words stick. I remembered the first time I met her parents. Her father's handshake was limp, distracted, like he was already disinterested in who I was. Her mother had smiled politely but spent most of the dinner asking Melissa about her ex-boyfriend, the one who went to law school. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't someone with a country club membership or a shiny sports car in the driveway. I was just me, a man who worked with his hands, who saved slowly, who built a life brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. And maybe that was never enough. The memories piled up like bricks in my chest. The countless family birthdays where I paid for the cake because Melissa's sister forgot. The times I fixed her brother's leaky roof, mowed her parents' lawn, even loaned money for their emergencies. Not once did anyone say thank you. Not once did anyone call me family. Instead, they called me Melissa's husband, like I was just an accessory, a placeholder. And Melissa, my wife, the woman I'd sworn vows to, had stood by quietly, letting me carry their burdens, never defending me, never correcting them. Maybe that's when the fracture began. Small, invisible, but real. But real. I set the photo back down, the frame clinking softly against the counter. The sound echoed in my chest, hollow, empty. I thought about calling her, telling her how much it hurt, asking her if she even realized what she'd done. But my phone lay silent on the table, its black screen reflecting a version of me I barely recognized. Tired eyes, unshaven jaw, a man who'd spent too long giving without receiving. My heart pounded as I stood, the chair legs scraping loudly against the tile. I walked into the living room, where sunlight fell across the old recliner. I lowered myself into it, the leather groaning under my weight. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could almost hear my father's voice. "Son," he used to say, "don't you ever let anyone make you feel like less than a man. You build your worth with your own two hands, not with their approval." I'd forgotten that. Somewhere between all the giving and the silence, I'd let Melissa's family write the definition of who I was. But not anymore. Because her words that morning weren't just casual. They weren't just a slip. They were the truth of how she saw me. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to stop begging to be included in a family that never wanted me. The weight in my chest shifted, not disappearing, but hardening into something else. Something sharper. Resolve. Melissa thought she'd silence me by excluding me from the reunion, but she had no idea that by shutting that door, she'd opened another one. And I intended to walk straight through it. That evening, I tried to busy myself around the house, but silence pressed in from every corner. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards, the faint smell of Melissa's perfume lingering in the hallway. She had left for the reunion hours ago, her laughter drifting out the door with the rolling suitcase. By now, she'd be surrounded by her family, clinking glasses, swapping stories. And me, I was here, cast aside like a forgotten ornament shoved into the attic. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the single dinner plate in front of me. Meatloaf leftovers. Cold, flavorless. I stabbed at it with my fork, but each bite tasted like betrayal. The phone buzzed beside me. For a moment, my chest leapt. Maybe Melissa had texted. Maybe she'd realized what she'd done. But no, it was worse. A group chat notification popped up. Reunion fun. Melissa's cousin had posted a picture. I opened it. There they all were, her entire family, gathered around a long table decorated with string lights. Melissa sat in the middle, radiant, a glass of wine in her hand. And next to her, my chair, empty. No, not empty. Her brother had taken it, laughing, grinning, like he belonged there more than I ever had. More photos followed. Melissa toasting with her parents. Melissa's sister leaning in close, whispering secrets that used to be mine. Even the kids, nieces and nephews, were smiling at someone else. I scrolled through the pictures, my grip on the phone tightening with every swipe. The edges of the screen dug into my palm. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, an outsider watching his own life from the sidelines. And then came the final blow. A video. Melissa herself, standing with her family. "So glad everyone could make it," she said, her voice bright, rehearsed. "It's wonderful to have the whole family together." The whole family. I laughed, a dry, bitter sound that cracked in my throat. The whole family except me. Something inside me snapped. The air in the room seemed heavier, the shadows deeper. My fork clattered against the plate, the sound sharp in the silence. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping hard against the tile. My chest rose and fell with each breath, faster, louder, like I'd been holding it in for years. They didn't want me there. Fine. But I wasn't going to sit here staring at cold leftovers and smiling faces on a screen, while my wife erased me from the very family I helped support. I walked to the closet, pulled out the old suitcase Melissa hadn't bothered to notice was still here. My hands moved with purpose. Shirts, jeans, the jacket my father gave me before he passed. I tucked it carefully on top, like a silent promise. The zipper closed with a sound that felt final, like the snapping of a chain. I glanced one last time at the kitchen, the counters I'd installed, the cabinets I'd painted, the home I had built piece by piece. And then I whispered into the silence, "If they don't want me in their family, I'll build my own." I picked up the suitcase, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The highway stretched before me like a ribbon of darkness, my headlights carving a narrow path through the night. My suitcase sat in the back seat, silent but heavy with the weight of what I'd just done. At first, adrenaline carried me. Each mile between me and that empty kitchen felt like a victory. The cool air through the cracked window tasted like freedom. But then, doubt crept in. Where was I really going? I didn't have a destination. Only the fierce need to escape, to prove, to myself and to Melissa, that I wasn't some abandoned relic collecting dust in her family's shadow. Yet, as the city lights faded, and the countryside swallowed me whole, The silence inside the car grew louder. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. What if Melissa was right? What if I was just too much, too loud, too awkward, too ordinary for the kind of family she wanted to present? The words replayed in my head, sharper each time. It would be better if you stayed home. My chest tightened. I pulled into a rest stop, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and vending machines humming in the corner. Parking under the dim glow, I shut off the engine. And suddenly, the exhaustion hit me.
The doubt.
The loneliness. I leaned back in my seat, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked older than I remembered. Lines deeper, eyes heavier. Maybe Melissa's family saw what I refused to. A man past his prime, clinging to a place he no longer belonged. The thought hollowed me out. For a moment, I almost turned the key, ready to head back, to apologize for leaving, to beg Melissa to let me slip quietly back into the background of her life. But then, as I sat there, a memory surfaced. My father's workshop. The smell of sawdust, the rhythmic sound of his hammer striking wood. I must have been 12 when he looked me straight in the eye and said, "A man who doubts his worth has already handed it to someone else." I closed my eyes, letting those words settle deep. No, I couldn't hand over my worth. Not to Melissa, not to her family, not to anyone. I opened the glove compartment and pulled out the old photograph I always carried. My father holding me on his shoulders at a county fair. Both of us laughing, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. A slow, steady breath filled my lungs. The fear was still there, but it was different now. Less a weight, more a spark. Yes, I was scared, but fear didn't mean weakness. Fear meant I had something to fight for, and I intended to fight. I started the engine again, the headlights flaring to life, and pulled back onto the highway. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. If you've ever been pushed aside by the very people you gave everything to, then maybe you know this feeling, that hollow ache in your chest, the weight of silence where love should have been. I was sitting behind the wheel, my future uncertain, my past replaying like a cruel movie, but deep down I knew I wasn't alone. Tell me, have you ever been excluded from something you thought you deserved to be part of? A family gathering, a friendship, a celebration? If so, I want to know. Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the only way we heal from betrayal is by realizing others have been there too. And trust me, what came next in my journey, it would change everything. The miles rolled by, but this time my mind was sharper, steadier. I wasn't just fleeing anymore. I was planning. The truth was, I'd spent too many years pouring myself into Melissa's family, only to be dismissed when it suited them. Her brother's house had heat one winter because I quietly paid the overdue bill. Her sister's credit card debt didn't destroy her, because I co-signed a loan to consolidate it. And her parents' broken porch? I rebuilt it, hammering in the heat of July, sweat dripping into my eyes while they sat inside with cold iced tea. Yet when Melissa looked at me that morning, she hadn't seen a man who'd built her family's comfort with his own two hands. She'd seen a nuisance, a liability. And now I wanted them to see me. Really see me. I pulled into a diner off the interstate, the kind with neon signs flickering against the night sky. The smell of fried food clung to the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of syrup. I slid into a booth, ordered a black coffee, and opened the small leather notebook I carried everywhere. It was supposed to be for budgeting, but tonight it became something else entirely. A blueprint. On one page, I scribbled every sacrifice I'd made for Melissa's family. Every dollar, every hour, every piece of myself I'd given. On the opposite page, I began listing what I had left. My skills, my savings, my assets. The contrast was staggering. Years of giving on one side, and yet on the other, I still had enough to build something new. For the first time in years, the balance wasn't just about money. It was about worth. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes but a kind smile, topped off my coffee. "You headed somewhere?" she asked, nodding to the suitcase at my side. I almost said nowhere, but instead I smiled faintly. Somewhere better. She didn't pry, just nodded like she understood, and walked away. Her simple question lingered in my mind long after I left the diner. Somewhere better. Not just a destination, but a state of being. I drove again, this time with a clearer purpose. By sunrise, I reached a small town 2 states away. The kind of town where people still waved when you drove by, where the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. I stopped at a local bed and breakfast, the kind Melissa would have wrinkled her nose at, too quaint for her tastes. But to me, it felt like possibility. I checked in, dropped my suitcase on the creaky wooden floor, and sat by the window, Outside, children rode their bikes down the quiet street, their laughter echoing in the crisp morning air. A man in overalls pushed a wheelbarrow across his yard. A woman hung laundry on a line that fluttered in the breeze. It was simple, unpolished, real, and for the first time in years I felt like I belonged. As the sun climbed higher, I opened my notebook again. But this time, I didn't write about debts or betrayals. I wrote about what I wanted to build, a family that wasn't bound by blood or obligation, but by choice. A place where I wasn't an outsider at the table, but the one setting it. Every line I wrote carved the doubt out of me, replacing it with something stronger. Melissa thought she had silenced me by keeping me from her reunion, but she'd only awakened a part of me I'd buried long ago, the part that knew how to build from nothing. This wasn't about revenge anymore, not yet. It was about reclaiming the man I used to be. But deep down, I knew one thing. If Melissa and her family thought they could erase me so easily, they were in for a surprise. Because when I finally did show myself again, it wouldn't be as the man they dismissed. It would be as the man they underestimated. The second morning at the bed and breakfast, I woke up earlier than usual. The air was cool, the kind that carried the scent of pine needles and dew. Birds chirped outside the window as sunlight filtered through the lace curtains. It felt different, lighter, like I wasn't waking up in someone else's story anymore. For the first time in years, the day was mine. I made coffee in the small kitchen downstairs, its aroma filling the cozy dining room. I sat with my notebook open, pen in hand, staring at two words I'd written in bold the night before. Take control. Melissa had control for too long. Her family decided who I was, where I belonged, how much space I was allowed to take. But here, with no one's shadow hanging over me, I realized something. Control was never taken from me. I had given it away, piece by piece, favor by favor, silence after silence. Not anymore. The plan began simply. First, I called my bank. I canceled the automatic payments I'd been making for Melissa's family. Quiet little loans that were never repaid, disguised as generosity. Her brother's utilities? Gone. Her parents' property tax bill? Their responsibility now. Her sister's car insurance that I'd been covering for 3 years? Effective immediately, canceled. Every call ended the same way, with a confirmation number and a weight lifted from my shoulders. By the time I hung up the last call, my hands were steady, my chest lighter. I wasn't their safety net anymore. Then I went further. I emailed my lawyer, a man Melissa had never met because she'd never thought I needed one. I'd like to review my assets, I wrote, and update beneficiaries. Within an hour, he replied with an appointment for the following week. I smiled. Melissa had told me to stay home, but what she didn't realize was that I was building a new home, one where she and her family wouldn't benefit from a single brick. Still, the doubts whispered late at night. What if this was petty? What if I was cutting ties I'd regret? But then the images of that reunion flooded back, the photos of Melissa beaming, surrounded by people who cheered my absence. Her voice in that video, so glad the whole family is here. The whole family. That phrase replayed like poison, fueling me more than coffee ever could. I spent the next days quietly preparing. I closed joint accounts, redirected investments, contacted old friends Melissa had pushed me away from, men who reminded me of who I was before I shrank myself to fit into her family's mold. Each call ended with laughter, with warmth, with the reminder that I wasn't invisible. At night, I walked through the little town, breathing in the scent of wood smoke from chimneys, listening to the distant bark of dogs. People nodded as they passed me. Some even stopped to talk, asking if I was new in town. For once, the question didn't sting. Yes, I said, starting fresh. And I meant it. But deep down, a seed of fire grew. Starting fresh wasn't enough. Melissa and her family had made me feel small, replaceable. They had erased me. I couldn't let that stand. Not because I needed revenge for myself, but because I had given them too much already. They needed to understand what it felt like when the man they dismissed stopped holding up their world. That was the truth Melissa would face. I closed my notebook one evening, the sun setting in hues of crimson and gold across the horizon. The leather cover was warm in my hands, almost pulsing with the weight of everything I'd written. The first half of my life had been about sacrifice. The second half would be about balance. And if Melissa thought she had seen the last of me at that reunion, she was wrong. The following week, I walked into my lawyer's office with the same calmness I used to carry onto construction sites years ago. Steady, deliberate, knowing the foundation I was about to pour would hold. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. The kind of place where decisions weren't just made, they were carved into stone. My lawyer, a sharp man in his early 50s, adjusted his glasses and greeted me with a firm handshake. "Good to see you again," he said. "What can we set in motion today?" I pulled out my notebook, the leather edges worn from days of constant handling, and slid it across the desk. "I want to make sure my assets are protected. I want every account, every property, every policy in my name reviewed. And most importantly," I leaned forward, my voice calm but cold, "I want to make sure Melissa and her family never see a dime they didn't earn." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood." For the next hour, we combed through everything: my investments, my savings, the retirement account Melissa had never contributed to but always spoke of as ours, the house that had my name alone on the deed, the life insurance policies. One by one, we shifted the beneficiaries. One by one, we secured each asset under trusts Melissa couldn't touch. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. But then came the moment that sealed everything. "Would you like to remove Melissa as beneficiary entirely?" the lawyer asked, his pen poised above the page. I hesitated for the briefest second. 20 years of marriage doesn't just disappear, no matter how cold it had become. Memories tried to tug me back, the early days when she smiled differently, when her laugh wasn't rehearsed. But then, like a blade through the fog, I saw her face from that video. "So glad the whole family is here." Her whole family, not mine. My hesitation hardened into resolve. "Remove her," I said firmly. "Everywhere." The pen scratched against the paper, ink bleeding permanence into the page. That was it. The line was crossed. When I walked out of that office, the sunlight hit differently. The air felt cleaner. The weight I'd carried for years had lifted, replaced with something sharper: freedom. I knew Melissa would discover it eventually. She'd learn that the man she dismissed, the man she thought could be excluded like an old chair in the garage, had quietly taken back every piece of power she'd been leaning on. And when she did, there would be no reversing it, no sweet words, no apologies. I had signed the documents, changed the locks, closed the accounts. The bridge between us wasn't just burned. It was gone. A week after signing the papers, my phone lit up with Melissa's name. For a moment, my chest tightened. Part of me, the foolish part, that still remembered our early years together, hoped maybe she was calling to apologize. Maybe she had realized what she'd done, the cruelty of her words, the emptiness she'd left in our home. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello?" My voice was careful, steady. "Hey." Melissa's tone was softer than I expected, almost tentative. "I know things have been rough between us. I just wanted to say I missed you at the reunion. It wasn't the same without you." A bitter laugh rose in my throat, but I swallowed it. Not the same? She hadn't seemed to miss me in those photos, raising her glass, smiling wide. But I said nothing. I let her speak. "The kids kept asking about you," she continued. "My mom even mentioned she hoped you were doing okay. I think we all realized it didn't feel complete without you." Her words slid through me like honey-coating glass, sweet but fragile. Dangerous. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the family who had erased me could suddenly feel my absence. That Melissa had woken up one morning and seen me for who I really was. "Maybe," she said gently, "we could have dinner when I get back. Just you and me, talk things through." Silence stretched between us. I looked around the small room at the bed and breakfast. The wooden beams above me, the hand-stitched quilt folded at the foot of the bed, the faint scent of lavender from the sachets tucked into the dresser drawers. It wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, but it was real, and in this quiet place I had felt more seen than I had in years under Melissa's roof. Still, hope clawed at me, that tiny, stubborn part of the heart that whispers maybe. "Dinner sounds fine," I finally said. Her sigh of relief echoed down the line. "Good, I'll be home Thursday. We'll go somewhere nice, my treat." We hung up, and for a few days I let myself imagine it. A dinner where she looked at me the way she once had. A conversation where her words weren't sharp, but warm. A second chance. But deep down, something gnawed at me. Because Melissa had never once said she was sorry. She had never once admitted what she'd done. And when Thursday came, when I walked into the restaurant she had chosen, I saw it in her eyes before she even spoke. The smile was too polished, the hug too practiced. This wasn't reconciliation. It was strategy. Melissa didn't miss me. She missed the man who paid the bills, who fixed the problems, who made her family's life easier. And when she realized that man no longer existed, the mask would fall. The false hope would shatter, and the real storm would begin. The restaurant Melissa chose was one of those sleek, modern places where the walls were lined with wine bottles and the waiters spoke in rehearsed tones. She always liked spots like this, places where appearances mattered more than comfort. She stood when I arrived, her smile wide, her dress carefully chosen. For a brief second, I felt a flicker of nostalgia, but then I noticed the way her eyes darted. Not warm, not loving, but calculating. We sat across from each other, candles flickering between us. "I'm glad you came," she said smoothly, reaching for her glass of Chardonnay. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about how we can move forward." I nodded slowly, waiting. She leaned forward, her voice low, controlled. "But to do that, I need you to be reasonable. My family depends on us, on you, and the changes you've been making lately. Closing accounts, canceling payments, they've been disruptive." There it was. Not love, not regret, not even a shred of apology. Just business. I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air like smoke. Melissa's smile faltered when I didn't immediately respond. "Listen," she pressed, "you've always been the stable one, the provider. But pulling away now, it looks selfish. People are talking." The word hit me like a slap. Selfish, after years of bleeding myself dry for her family. I was selfish for finally saying no. But before I could speak, she added the blow I didn't see coming. "My father has been working with an attorney. He says if you're not willing to cooperate, they might need to revisit some legal arrangements. The house, the accounts, everything you think you control." My heart pounded. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "Legal arrangements?" I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. Melissa didn't flinch. She swirled her wine as if she were discussing the weather. "We're just exploring options. Nobody wants things to get ugly. But you can understand why my family feels threatened." I sat back, the leather of the booth creaking under my weight. That was it. The mask had slipped. This dinner wasn't reconciliation. It was an ambush, a warning dressed in candlelight. And then something unexpected happened. I didn't feel anger, not like before. What I felt was clarity. Sharp, precise. Because what Melissa didn't know was that I had already shifted everything. The accounts, the policies, the assets. What she thought she could still reach for was already gone. Her family wasn't exploring options, they were grasping at air. I looked her in the eyes and let a slow smile spread across my face. "You're right, Melissa," I said softly. "Things have changed, but not in the way you think." For the first time in years, she looked unsettled. Her confidence cracked, just slightly. And in that moment, I knew the game had turned. Melissa thought she was holding the cards. But the truth, the deck was mine. Have you ever sat across from someone you once loved, someone you trusted with your whole heart, and realized they were no longer speaking to you, but to the version of you they thought they could control? That moment cuts deeper than any betrayal. I looked at Melissa that night, her words dripping with entitlement, and I knew this wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who's ever been used, drained, or silenced by the people they sacrificed everything for. If you've ever been in that position, if you've ever given until there was nothing left, only to be told it still wasn't enough, then you understand exactly what I felt. And what I decided to do next? It wasn't just revenge. It was justice. Melissa thought our dinner was a quiet negotiation. What she didn't know was that I had already planned my move for the family's next gathering. 2 weeks later, Melissa's parents hosted a post-reunion celebration dinner. A chance, they said, to thank everyone who had made the reunion such a success. Of course, I hadn't been invited, not directly, but Melissa let it slip, almost carelessly, as if daring me to feel left out again. This time, I didn't stay away. I arrived just as the guests were settling in. The house was glowing with warm light, the chatter of voices spilling out onto the driveway. Laughter floated through the air, the kind that used to include me before they decided I was disposable. When I stepped inside, the room went quiet. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Melissa's mother blinked in surprise, her father's face tightening with disapproval. Melissa herself stood up so quickly her chair scraped across the hardwood floor. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp. I smiled calmly, adjusting my jacket. "I came to celebrate. After all, isn't this a family event?" A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Her brother smirked, already readying a jab. "Didn't get the memo, huh?" I ignored him. Instead, I walked to the head of the table, the spot usually reserved for Melissa's father, and set down a folder I had brought with me. The manila edges stood out against the crisp white tablecloth. Melissa's eyes widened. "What is that?" I looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes before I spoke. Proof, I said evenly. Proof of everything I've done for this family. The bills I paid, the repairs I made, the debts I cleared, every sacrifice you conveniently forgot. Gasps echoed softly. Melissa's sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her brother's smirk faltered. I flipped the folder open. Receipts, bank statements, photographs. Each page a testament to the years I carried burdens that weren't mine. You treated me like an outsider, I continued, my voice louder now, steady and deliberate. But let's be honest. Without me, half of this family wouldn't even be sitting here. Because without me, some of these lights wouldn't be on. Some of these roofs would have caved in. Some of these lives would look very different. Melissa's father slammed his hand on the table. That's enough! But I didn't stop. I leaned forward, my words sharp as glass. You all told yourselves I was just Melissa's husband, temporary, replaceable. But the truth is, I was the backbone of this family for years. And when I finally stopped, you felt it, didn't you? The missed payments, the canceled accounts, the silence where my support used to be. Eyes darted around the table, guilt flashing in more than a few faces. Melissa tried to steady her voice. You're embarrassing yourself. No, I said firmly, my eyes locking on hers. I'm revealing you, all of you. And the best part? I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small envelope. It's over. Every tie, every account, every safety net you used to lean on. It's gone. I laid the envelope on the table, the weight of finality sinking into the silence. The room buzzed with shock, shame, anger. But beneath it all, there was something else, the undeniable truth. For the first time, they couldn't dismiss me, and I wasn't finished yet. The silence at the table was heavy, broken only by the faint clink of a spoon dropping into a bowl. Melissa's face flushed red, her perfect composure slipping for the first time. You had no right, she spat, her voice trembling. None of this was meant for the family to see. I tilted my head, keeping my tone calm, almost amused. No right, Melissa? I had every right. I paid for those rights. With my money, my time, my life. Her brother leaned forward, trying to regain control. So what, you want a medal? You chose to help us. Nobody forced you. I locked eyes with him. You're right. Nobody forced me. I gave freely. But here's the truth you don't want to admit. When the giving stopped, the facade of this family started to crumble. That's how fragile it really was. Melissa's mother tried to interject, her voice high-pitched with panic. This isn't the time or the place. I cut her off with a steady hand. No, this is exactly the time, because for years you've all whispered about me, laughed at me, dismissed me. Tonight you hear me. Melissa's father rose from his chair, puffing his chest, like he still held authority. You think cutting us off makes you powerful? It makes you pathetic. You'll end up alone. I stood too, meeting his glare without flinching. Alone is better than being surrounded by parasites. The word cracked through the room like thunder, gasps, shifts in chairs. Melissa's eyes widened in shock, part humiliation, part fury. You don't mean that, she said, almost pleading now. We're your family. I leaned forward, my voice dropping low, but carrying enough weight for every person to hear. No, Melissa, I was never your family. I was your provider, your solution, your convenience, and tonight I end it. I slid the envelope across the table. Melissa's hands shook as she opened it. Inside were copies of the documents from my lawyer, proof that every account had been shifted, every safety net severed, every tie broken. Her face drained of color as she read. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I straightened my jacket, glanced around the table, and let the silence do the work. Their shame filled the room better than any speech could. Finally, I spoke, my tone calm, almost gentle. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. You'll need the strength, because from this day forward, you stand on your own. With that, I turned, walking out as the room erupted behind me. Angry voices. Melissa's choked sob. The chaos of a family stripped bare. But I didn't look back. Because the man who had walked into that house was not the same man walking out. I had taken back my power, and nothing, not Melissa, not her family, not their threats could ever touch me again. The night air hit me like a baptism, cool, crisp, alive. Behind me, Melissa's family was unraveling, their voices echoing faintly through the walls, anger, denial, panic. For years I had been the glue holding them together, though they never admitted it. Now with that glue gone, the cracks were finally showing. I walked to my car slowly, deliberately, savoring each step. For the first time in decades, I wasn't rushing to fix anyone's problems. I wasn't carrying their burdens on my back. My only responsibility was the sound of my own footsteps on the gravel driveway. By the time I reached the small town where I had started over, word had already spread. Melissa called me 3 times that night. I didn't answer. Her texts shifted in tone. First anger, then pleading, then silence. Her family, it seemed, had turned on her the moment they realized the safety net was gone. I imagined the scene clearly. Her brother demanding why I had stopped paying his bills. Her sister furious over the canceled insurance. Her parents asking Melissa how she could let me walk away. They would all blame her because that's what parasites do when the host stops feeding them. They turn on each other. And Melissa, she would finally feel the weight I had carried all these years. Days turned into weeks. I settled into my new routine. The little bed and breakfast gave way to a small rental house with a porch that looked out onto rolling hills. I fixed the squeaky steps myself, painted the walls, planted a few flowers out front. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, built by my own 2 hands, with no shadows cast by ungrateful in-laws. One morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, a letter arrived. Melissa's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. Inside, her words spilled across the page in shaky script. I didn't realize how much you did for us until it all disappeared. I thought your place in my life was guaranteed, no matter how I treated you. I was wrong. I don't know who I am without you holding everything together. Please come home. For a long time, I just stared at the letter. Once those words might have pulled me back. Once I might have clung to them as proof that she still cared. But not now. Now, I saw them for what they were: desperation, not love; regret, not respect. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and set it aside. Not torn, not burned, just put away, like an artifact from a life that no longer belonged to me. As the sun rose higher, warming the porch, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about freeing myself. And in freeing myself, I had already won. Melissa and her family would spend months, maybe years, untangling the mess they had created. They would learn, piece by piece, what life without me truly meant. And me? I had a new beginning, one not defined by their approval, but by my own choices. I raised my coffee mug to the horizon, the light spilling across the hills like a promise. Justice had been served, and I was finally free. Months passed, seasons shifted, and with them so did I. The man who once sat in a silent kitchen, waiting for scraps of acceptance, no longer existed. In his place stood someone new, someone who had tasted betrayal, walked through the fire, and come out forged, not broken. My new life was simple, but every piece of it felt earned. The little rental house became a home. I built shelves for my books, carved a table out of reclaimed wood, planted vegetables in a patch of soil that Melissa would have sneered at for being too small to bother with. Yet each tomato, each sprig of basil, felt like a declaration of independence. The neighbors came to know me by name, not as Melissa's husband, but as me. They invited me to potlucks, asked for help with projects, offered pies left on my porch. There was no judgment, no comparisons, no whispered reminders of what I wasn't, only acceptance of who I was. And slowly I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. But the real transformation wasn't just external, it was inside me. I no longer measured my worth by how much I gave away, or how much approval I earned. I measured it by the peace in my mornings, the steadiness in my hands, the clarity in my choices. For too long I had built my identity around being indispensable to people who didn't value me. Now I built it around being true to myself. The symbolic object that had followed me through it all. The old leather notebook was now filled cover to cover. The first half was rage, lists of debts, sacrifices, betrayals, but the second half, dreams, ideas, gratitude. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in orange and gold, I flipped through the notebook and paused on a page that read, "Some families are inherited, others are built." That was my truth. I had stopped begging to belong in a family that never wanted me. Instead, I started building a family of choice, friends who laughed with me, neighbors who leaned on me, people who saw me not as a resource, but as a man with worth. And as for Melissa, I heard bits and pieces. Her brother lost his house when the bills piled up. Her sister declared bankruptcy after the insurance lapsed. Her parents sold their home to cover debts they could no longer hide. Melissa herself tried once more to contact me, an email this time, longer than the letter, full of confessions and regrets. But I never replied. because my silence spoke louder than any words ever could. Justice had already been served. Now, it was time to live. That fall, I hosted a dinner on my porch. The table was mismatched, the chairs borrowed, the food simple: roast chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from my garden. My new friends gathered around, their laughter rising into the cool evening air. As I looked around the table, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Home. Not because of bloodlines, not because of obligations, but because every person there wanted to be. The man who once begged for a seat at someone else's table had built his own, and this time, no one could take it away. Looking back now, I realize the greatest betrayal wasn't Melissa excluding me from that reunion. It was me excluding myself from my own worth, for years, just to keep the peace. When I finally stopped begging for a seat at their table and built my own, I discovered something far greater than revenge. I discovered freedom. And maybe that's the lesson here. Family isn't defined by blood, or by titles, or by who calls the loudest. Family is defined by who shows up, who values you, who sees you. If you've ever been dismissed, excluded, or made to feel like you didn't belong, remember this: you have the power to build your own table. And when you do, those who once underestimated you will be forced to watch from the outside. Tell me, what would you have done in my place?